Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar launching our call for expressions of interests in the hydrogen and CO2 markets. So first and foremost, for non-French speakers, simultaneous translation will be provided and presentation materials will be available in English following the webinar. And as the webinar is being recorded, we will also be sharing the video on our website. So today's presentation will be made by three people, as I'm joined by Laetitia Mag, who's Head of Development for our Hydrogen Infrastructure Projects, Mallory Navarre, Head of Development for our CO2 Infrastructure Projects, and I'm Antoine Charbonnier. I'm Head of the Strategy, Innovation and Development Department, where these projects are developed. For this webinar, we've planned a presentation followed by a question and answer session. So we're going to begin with a brief presentation of our company and its ambitions in the face of the challenges of decarbonisation before going into the nitty-gritty of the core for call of expressions of interest, development of hydrogen infrastructures, the development of CO2 infrastructure, and then we'll present the terms and conditions for participating in the call for expressions of interest, the responses to which will help us to optimize the size of these future networks. You can ask your questions throughout the webinar via the Menti platform, the codes you can see on the screen here, and we'll answer them in the second part of the webinar. So, first of all, for those of you who don't know us, Teréga has over 70 years' experience in natural gas transmission and storage. We operate a network of more than 5,000 kilometers of gas transmission pipelines in the southwest of France and an underground storage site at the center of this network, equivalent to more than 6 billion cubic meters of gas. So, on behalf of our customers, we deliver natural gas to towns, cities and industries, and we make sure that this gas is available at all times, thanks to our at all periods of the year, in fact, thanks to our storage facilities, but also thanks to cross-border pipelines that enable exchanges between the French and Spanish markets, so we can supply all our regions like this. So, like like all the players in our sector, we're undergoing major transformation to meet the challenges of climate change. Natural gas we transport is gradually being replaced by biomethane, and we want to continue to play our role as a gas logistics provider in the new hydrogen and CO2 markets. The needs are really there. The national and European plans are focusing on the development of these two gases, which are considered to be essential elements for the decarbonisation of certain sectors, industries and mobility, but also as elements of energy autonomy and industrial competitiveness. The EU's REPowerEU plan, which aims to break the EU's dependence on Russian gas, involves a number of diversification measures. For example, first of all, diversify sources of supply, and a strategy of decarbonisation with a target of 35 billion cubic meters of biomethane production by 2030, but also low-carbon hydrogen target of 20 million tonnes by 2030, 10 million tonnes of European production, and 10 million tonnes of imports. So 50 million tonnes would be imported per year. And more recently, the Net Zero Industry Act, which aims to boost the competitiveness of European industry, has set the target of achieving a CO2 capture capacity of 50 million tonnes per year by 2030 for storage and recovery purposes. And it's important that the development of the CO2 recovery sector, it's also a key issue since CO2 can be recombined with hydrogen to produce synthetic fuels and synthetic chemicals. So they are really two complementary molecules. These volumes will generate significant flow requirements between the producer and consumer sites for hydrogen, but also between the emitting sites and the storage or the recovery sites for CO2. So for 3 years now, we've been working to develop a logistics chain via the regional infrastructure projects that we'll be presenting to you. And these projects are part of a pooling approach and a European vision, which is illustrated here by the hydrogen backbone on the European size. This logistics chain, which could extend across the continent with more than 50,000 kilometers of pipelines by 2040, will enable imports between hydrogen producing and hydrogen consuming countries. And so this will make it possible to optimize this logistics chain and supply chain, and this should generate significant economies of scale. So Teréga is at the heart of this major energy project, beginning with the Barma and HISO projects. Now I'm going to hand over to Laetitia. Thanks, Antoine. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Antoine mentioned, we're now going to get to the heart of this call for expressions of interest, because I'm going to give you a slightly more detailed presentation of our hydrogen project. It's called HISO, and that means Hydrogen Southwest Corridor. So this project is very complementary with the project which is called Barma that Antoine just mentioned. And that will link the cities of Barcelona and Marseille in 2030, with the aim of eventually transporting 2 million tons of hydrogen, which means 20% of the flows that, as Antoine mentioned, are considered the 10 million tons that Europe will need annually. So if we look at this infrastructure in the southwest, it's all over the southwest, in fact. It's important to mention that it really does form what I would call a link between what we'll call the local ecosystem developments and this overarching vision of large-scale hydrogen transport that Antoine was talking and is being still under development and should be online around 2032. So HISO is structured around the 6 ecosystems that you can see on the map, and which are already part of a dynamic thrust, in fact. And these are familiar projects, in fact, in particular. We have, for example, what's called the Mobility Corridor, which is being developed by the Occitania region and its hydrogen strategy. We've got lots of projects around the town of Lac, which is based on its decarbonisation strategy, and hydrogen is one of the main vectors. It's one of the main vectors of that strategy, in fact. And there's also a dynamic around the ports, Bordeaux, Port-la-Nouvelle, and Bayonne. Bayonne in the heart of the Basque Country, with projects that are also very well established and strong dynamics around this hydrogen vector and chemical products such as fuel oils, just as Antoine was saying, fuel oils, again, I was saying ISAFs, ammonia, which are all linked to this hydrogen project. So this project, as you can see here, is based around 600 kilometers, roughly speaking, pipeline. And based on the outlook we have at the moment and the scenarios we've developed around the actual decline in gas use on our network, we can imagine that in the long term, 30% of pipelines that are currently used for gas will be converted to hydrogen in the future. And of course, to be able to do this, we're currently carrying out additional technical analysis and studies to ensure that this conversion can be carried out in total safety for all users. 70% of this network should therefore be made up of new pipelines. So, as things stand, in fact, this project also has the particularity of highlighting some specific geological features that we have that exist in the southwestern basin, the Aquitaine Basin, particularly what are called salt diapirs, in which we can structure storage cavities that then can be used to store hydrogen. So currently, in fact, we're looking with one of our partners called the Salin Group. We're looking at the technical feasibility possibility of developing these salt storage capacities. And we've identified a potential of 500 gigawatt hours by 2030. And in the long term, maximum and optimized exploitation of these diapirs could generate a potential of around 1 terawatt hour. So there you have it then for the major infrastructure of this project that we've already identified to date. So we're talking about one of the main vectors, which will be hydrogen, but I'd just like to add one more thing. If we take a longer term view, you can see that today there are two small dotted lines on this map. Those represent our connections with our Spanish gas carrier counterparts, and around about 2040, we could imagine that we could have a sort of a complementary route for this hydrogen and create a complementary corridor with Barmore in a vision where the hydrogen market will already be established, and to have this corridor that would really extend westwards between our two countries. So I'd like to stress that this call for expressions of interest is very important for us. Why? Because today we have this vision. We've transcribed this vision in what we are. We know the dynamics of the territory and what a hydrogen plan for tomorrow could look like. But that said, we need your vision, your input in order to define, structure and size tomorrow's infrastructure in the most appropriate way, to know really what that could be. In the same way, to have the most appropriate staging over time to meet the needs of the regions. It's one of the vectors for Teréga's transformation and its commitment to the energy transition and to hydrogen. But there is the second one, as Antoine mentioned at the start, it's CO2. And so to talk about this CO2 infrastructure, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Mallory. Well, it's true that in addition to the use of hydrogen as an energy source, CCUS technologies have been identified as pillars of decarbonisation for industry at national level, as announced in the new CCS strategy recently announced by our Prime Minister. So, for the past 3 years, Teréga has been a partner in the Picasso program. Picasso is a program initiated by the Avenir Cluster and the Urban Community of Pau, which aims to develop a CCUS sector of excellence in southwest France and around the potential geological storage sites in the Pyrenean hinterland, which would ensure France's sovereignty of all its CCUS needs. So, beyond the regional and national level, the project also has a European dimension because it is a candidate for the 6th list of projects of community interest, and the final list will be announced this autumn. So, through the feasibility studies that we've been able to carry out on the logistics infrastructure, an initial infrastructure plan is taking shape, as shown on the map here. And it could cover the development of a two-phase route from the Pont-la Nouvelle area to the two-phase route from La Pont-Nouvelle area to the storage and recovery site. So the first phase by 2030 could run from the Haute-Garonne area to the storage and recovery areas. That would be by 2030. Then the second stage, 2035, could link the Toulouse and Pont-la Nouvelle areas via dedicated port infrastructure. The second route could go from Bordeaux to the storage and recovery zones. That's the western route, and then there would be western route, which could, by 2030 and by dedicated port infrastructures, link gases from Bayonne to the transport and storage facilities. So we're talking about a shared infrastructure project designed to transport industrial CO2 of fossil origin that is considered to be unavoidable. But we can also see that the large volumes of CO2 of biogenic origin available in the region would make it possible to develop and support the development of this recovery sector, thanks also to all the hydrogen infrastructure that will be developed at the same time. So the aim here is to develop and enable as many users as possible to benefit from shared infrastructure at the most competitive cost possible, whether from 2030 or for future needs up to 2050. And we could be right up to 2050. And to achieve this, it's important for Teréga to have a vision and to know as far in advance as possible the potential future needs for transport recovery and storage in the region, and as well as their location as well. And so that's why we've launched this call for expressions of interest. And so, Laetitia, I'll give you the floor to talk about the more technical aspects of taking part. Thank you, Mallory. So, please bear with me because, you know, these demonstrations are not very easy, but I'm just going to show you step by step what you're going to have to do to be able to answer this call, and so you can be operational. I know some of you, in fact, have already created their account, and so the idea is to go onto the institutional site, Teréga Institutional site, and here you can see this article dedicated to the call. Here it is. And you've got all the details here, in fact, of this call for expressions of interest. So you go onto the dedicated page, and you've got all the necessary details here. It's available from 26th of June to mid-October. You've got all of the dispositions here, all the technical details, and you can then click on this little button, which takes you to this page, which has been developed to be able to answer this call. So if you've already created the call, in fact, you'll be able to find your identifier and password, but otherwise you've got to create your account, of course. Once you've done that, then you connect in and put your identifier and password in. So here we are, we're connecting now. Here we are on the platform as it exists at the present. And you'll be able to include your new participation here, and you can put in this data, your data, in fact, regarding your project. Even if you don't know exactly what you want to do, no problem there, because what we're really looking for is sort of initial information, preliminary information. So if you're, for example, a stakeholder in CO2 and or H2, or both, in fact, you've got all these functionalities. Yes, and all those fields marked with asterisks, they're the obligatory ones, of course. Of course, you've got to validate those. So you've got to fill in those fields with the asterisks. So here we are. I'm an industrialist. Okay, I'm filling this in. Just a few words about your project. Here you can see your capacity of storage or transport capacity, of course, and then a certain number of questions regarding your installations. What's going to be important for us is to know your location, because for us that allows us to revisit the sort of the sizing of our infrastructure, or to consolidate what we already decided. So we really need to know where your projects are situated. Same thing for CO2 here, and then once you've done all that, then you've got validate here, and that allows you to validate the formula. So what's important to know is that at any moment you can come back to the formula, you can change things, modify it, and also you can supply several formulas. In fact, send in formulas concerning several different projects for territories, as many formulas as you wish. In fact.
Donc merci. Je vais juste rappeler sur la slide qui doit être une slide
just to go back to the conclusion slide now. In fact, yes, thank you.
Hop, je vais reprendre la main.
I'll just take that over again. Thank you. So here we are. So this call for expressions of interest open to the 13th of October, as I was saying. We simply ask you to fill in this formula to really help us to know as well as possible what your expectations are. And of course, at the end of this period of consultation, we will consolidate these data, and there will be obviously a report, totally confidential. Your data will remain confidential, of course, and during December that report will be given back to everybody. But for any problems or technical details, you've got this mail here, you've got contact, you've got the address there, you see at the bottom. So please don't hesitate, fire away. If you've got any questions, please tell us. Our teams are at your disposal to answer any questions you may have. So thank you, and just back to Antoine, in fact, to finish off. So obviously you will see that we really want to move quickly as fast as quickly as possible, and this will allow us to really get to know what all the needs are for the territory. The objective being, of course, to be able to design with you, along with you, infrastructure and logistic which is the most appropriately sized and meets your expectations as well as possible. The objective being to be able to reach out to as large a number of stakeholders as possible and to offer as efficient a service as possible. So that we have the presentations in. Now we'll be able to answer the questions that you've been putting in, and the first ones will be coming up on the screen now, I think. So we'll answer these as well as we can. Obviously, if there is any need for any further details, we'll get back to you later. But here's the first one. Concerns hydrogen.
S'agissant de l'hydrogène, si l'appel à manifestation d'intérêt s'avère concluant en termes
Okay.
d'expression de besoin,
when do you think you will launch the feasibility studies for hydrogen?
Je vais prendre la réponse à cette question.
Thanks.
Merci. Donc là, l'idée, c'est, vous l'avez compris, il y aura
so you'll have time to answer and consolidate your answers. But this question, it's important because if any of you you see the formula, there's a question: would you be ready to participate in the financing of these feasibility studies? That's the question on the formula. Now, according to the quantity of people or stakeholders who are interested by a particular study, and according to the number of responses we have, for example, we can of course imagine we could launch a feasibility study very quickly in 2024, regarding the first semester 24, in fact, that could be envisaged. Here's the next one now. What investments are needed for such infrastructure, and how are you going to finance them? Well, I'll answer for hydrogen. In fact, you've seen, in fact, we've got a capex which is about 1.5 billion, but these are very preliminary estimates. You will understand, of course, this is just pre-designed data. Of course, we got that on the basis of the costs that we've already got available. So this is, again, I do underline, it's very preliminary estimates. That's why it's important we can work together. So how do you think we're going to finance them? Well, unlike natural gas, in fact, hydrogen is not part of, does not subject to a regulatory regime. So obviously we have to find financiers, stakeholders who are ready to invest with us in order to get to the right level of investment. But obviously these projects have already been submitted within the framework of a European project, so we expect European funding. Now, regarding CO2, in fact, basically the answer is the same for CO2. In fact, it's very similar infrastructure, in fact, which is required. And in terms of financing, above and beyond what Laetitia was saying, of course, the non-regulatory nature of this, we are also answering other calls for other projects in order to receive subsidies to develop this infrastructure. These are both national and European projects that we are answering, and the PCE project for the intercommunity labeling of a project. This opens up considerable possibilities of financing that European project, PCE. So you can see these are intense projects. They demand a lot of financing. Nevertheless, given the volumes of gas that we're going to transport, we think that we'll be able to offset these costs relatively soon. I mean, we're talking about pipelines are going to be transporting 2 to 3 million tons per year. It's considerable, and obviously that can be. This probably will be a few dozens of euros per ton, and obviously for us as investors and operators of this infrastructure, it enables us to turn profit here. quickly.
le gaz
The
transporté et
figures
stocké
are
en
obviously
surface
important,
localement, ce qui nous
large,
permet en fait d'envisager un
and
modèle économique
so obviously
pertinent pour
we need to
l'ensemble des
establish the right
éditeurs
business
et des
model
clients
for this whole
immobiliers.
project.
Alors, il y avait une question
Another question
concernant l'hydrogène vert et l'hydrogène bas
concerning
carbone.
low carbon and
En fait,
green
une différence entre hydrogène vert
green
et bas carbone.
hydrogen.
En tout cas, surtout en France,
Very little
en
difference
particulier
here,
sur
particularly in France.
la capacité de production électrique nucléaire.
J'ai vu passer une question sur la gestion
Another
de la
question
confidentialité.
concerning confidentiality.
Toute réponse
Any
à
answer
cet timing
on
est
this
gérée
formula obviously
suivant les
is
modalités
subject to
réglementaires de
all the rules of
confidentialité. Toute réponse sera
confidentiality. So
confidentielle.
all of your
Les restrictions
data
qui seront
that
faites
you give us
seront sous
will
forme de
be
données
treated with
agrégées.
full
Mais
confidentiality.
il est bien évident que si vraiment vous
But of
souhaitez
course, if you
signer
would
un
like
accord de
to sign a
confidentialité,
non-disclosure
alors dans ce
agreement,
cas-là, faites
then
part
just please let us
à
know,
l'email
and
qui a été
the
mentionné
email address, that contact address that you
contact@teréga.fr
saw earlier on,
et nous
and
essaierons
obviously
évidemment de trouver
we
des
will
modalités
try
de
to establish
fonctionnement.
the
Merci.
modalities for that agreement.
Nous avons une question
Another
sur
question for
CO2
CO2 now.
Oui, alors bonjour, merci
Hello,
pour votre
thank you for your
présentation.
presentation.
Pourriez-vous
Could
nous
you
en donner
tell us
plus
more
de détails sur
details
les
about
origines de
the
ce gisement
origin
biogénique de
of this
CO2?
biogenic
En effet,
CO2?
on a la particularité
Yes,
sur le territoire
in the
du
southwest of
sud-ouest de la France
France,
d'avoir
we
un
have
nombre
a
d'industries
large
papetières
number
assez
of
importants
CO2
qui ont des émissions
supplies which have
de CO2 biogénique, c'est-à-dire issues de
which
combustion de
come
biomasse
from the
très
combustion of
significative de
biomass,
par
and it's very
leur process
significant in
industriel.
our
On parle de
industries
plusieurs
in
centaines
the southwest of France.
de milliers de tonnes de CO2
Several
émis
million
par an,
tons emitted
et
per
pour
year,
lesquels
and obviously
effectivement
we can
développer des
develop
infrastructures mutualisées
mutualized infrastructure to process this
permettrait
would
de
allow us
développer le S
to
du
develop
stockage du CCUS et également la valorisation.
CCUS and improve our valorization capacities.
En complément, bon, c'est vrai que
The
la région
southwest,
sud-ouest
the southwest and Nouvelle-Aquitaine
ont des
region
filières
has a very,
bois
very strong
et des filières agricoles qui
wood
sont relativement
industry. A
importantes.
lot of
Effectivement, il y a
industries based on
la
wood,
papetière
paper pulp,
qui est
paper
émettrice de
mills,
CO2 biogénique. Il y a également la filière de
which
production
produces a lot of
méthanes, puisque le CO2 est
biomethane,
un coproduit
chips, wood
de
chips,
nos produits. Et
wood
effectivement,
mills. And so this
gisement
is
est
a
particulièrement
very
attractif
attractive
puisqu'il peut être
source
valorisé de deux
of
manières,
biomass.
soit en étant valorisé
It can be
localement, en étant
valorized
recombiné à
locally
l'hydrogène,
or
soit en
combined
étant
with
stocké
hydrogen, or
et
can be
monétisé sous forme
stored,
de crédits
then
d'émission
can be
négatifs. Donc,
turned into
le
credits.
service que nous
And
souhaitons
the
rendre
services that
à
we'd
ces
like
acteurs-là, c'est un service
render here, it's
capture, développement d'une
capturing
infrastructure de
CO2,
mais aussi de transport,
storing,
de stockage
transport,
de ce CO2.
and
Et puis
then
nous les accompagnons
we
également
can
dans la définition de la valeur de ce CO2
accompany
biogénique,
our
puisque
partners in
en ce qui
defining the
concerne
value of that
des
CO2.
industries comme l'industrie
For example,
cimentière
I'm thinking
ou
perhaps of the
l'industrie
cement
fichier
industry as
sidérurgique,
well.
le
That's
prix du
where
CO2
the
est
price
fixé
of CO2
réglementairement
is
par le
set
marché des quotas
by
ETS. Pour le CO2
by the
biogénique, c'est
market.
un
It's
peu
a little bit
différent.
different that sector,
Et donc,
but
nous
we
proposons
will propose to
d'accompagner ces acteurs
accompany those
pour qu'ils
stakeholders
puissent
so
valoriser au
that they
meilleur
can
prix
valorize
ce
that
CO2
CO2 at the best
biogénique, que
possible
ce soit
price,
sous forme de
either
valorisation locale
locally
ou et
and or
sous forme
in the form of the
création de
creation
crédits
of
d'émission négative
credits,
via le
credit
stockage.
storage credits.
Alors, sous quelle forme sera
So,
transporté le
how will the
CO2
CO2
aujourd'hui, étant donné les
be
volumes dont on
transported,
parle,
given the volumes that
dont on
we're
a
talking,
mentionné,
and annually, I was
de
saying,
l'ordre de
2
2
to
à
3
3
million
millions de tonnes de
tons
CO2
per
transportées par
year
an sur centaines de kilomètres,
on hundreds of
on
kilometers.
est sur du
So
transport en
this is
phase
dense.
dense.
This is a dense transport.
C'est-à-dire de limiter
So
les pertes
a dense
de
form,
charge
which
et qui
which
permet
allows us
d'optimiser le
to
dimensionnement
limit
des infrastructures.
limit losses and makes the system much more efficient in a dense form.
Donc on a une question concernant une
A
alternative de
question
transport par canalisation,
concerning a different alternative form of transport
la possibilité
by
d'utiliser des
using
bateaux
boats on
pour
canals.
transporter
That's a question
l'hydrogène.
here.
Alors,
To transport
l'hydrogène est
hydrogen.
une molécule
Hydrogen
qui est
is
bien
a
moins
liquid
dense
which is
que
less dense than methane,
et par conséquent qui se transporte
but
beaucoup
is
moins bien,
less easy to transport
en tout cas sous forme
in liquid form.
D'où la
Hence,
difficulté de
the
le transporter
difficulty of
par bateau
transporting
aujourd'hui.
it by boat
Par
today.
ailleurs, notre objectif
And given our objectives with this infrastructural project, the idea is to be able to valorize all of the quantity of hydrogen produced in our regions or in neighboring regions, in the north of Spain, I'm thinking particularly of, over a few hundred kilometers, and the best solution as technology stands at the moment is pipelines.
Là, je vois une question sur les
Here's a question
solutions
concerning
techniques et les prestations
technical
spécialisées.
solutions
Est-ce que
for
là, il
special services,
concerne les entreprises qui proposent des solutions
concerning
techniques et
special
prestations spécialisées?
companies
Dans un premier temps,
that offer
non, en
special
fait.
services.
Aujourd'hui, on
Well,
est vraiment
no,
sur le
for example, we're just
recensement des
looking at what
besoins
the needs are for the
de
moment
transport
of
et ou
transport
de
and or
stockage
storage
autour du
concerning
CO2, donc autour
CO2. That's the needs of the
des
producers,
consommateurs,
the
ce que nous on
consumers,
appelle les
the
intermédiaires de
intermediaries, the
l'énergie, des
energy intermediaries, the
transporteurs, des
traders,
traders,
the
voilà, de
transporters,
tous les gens
all
qui
of
vont
the
mettre en œuvre ces
stakeholders
deux
who are
flux
going
que
to
sont
be working
l'hydrogène
in
et le
this field
CO2. On est
in
vraiment dans un
hydrogen and
premier temps
CO2.
là-dessus.
That's
Il
the
est bien
first
évident
stage. But
que pour
obviously,
mener ces projets, nous aurons besoin
to be
de
able
la mise en œuvre de solutions
to conduct
techniques
this
et
project,
de toutes
we'll
les
need all
entreprises qui
these other
proposent
companies
des
who
solutions techniques
propose
spécialisées,
specialized
mais ça
services and
interviendra
solutions,
dans
but
le
that will
cadre
come
des
in
études
within
qui
the
seront
framework
faites.
of the studies that will
Et
be
bien sûr,
undertaken. And
j'attire
also
aussi l'attention
undertake
sur le fait que
draw attention to the
toutes les
fact that
démarches
all of the
d'innovation, on le voit, seront
innovation
très intéressantes
processes
justement, c'est une question qui
will be
arrive
very
dessus,
important. And I see a question
autour
coming about
de
this
ces projets-là, parce que
because
notamment sur de la
regarding
reconversion de
the
canalisation,
reconversion of pipelines,
on n'a pas
we
toutes
don't
les
have
clés
all the
aujourd'hui.
keys at the
On peut
moment. In
aussi
fact,
avoir des choses qui nécessitent
we
des
may need
développements
new
complémentaires.
complementary
Donc
developments.
toutes les
So
démarches
all of the
d'innovation
new
seront évidemment
innovations
regardées
will
par
be kept
Teréga dans le
within
cadre des
by
études
Teréga
notamment liées à
within the
ces
framework of
projets,
these studies that
chose que
we're
nous
undertaking
travaillons
at the
déjà
moment,
au sein
that
de
we're
notre pôle
conducting
aussi
in
recherche
our
et innovation. Je ne
R&D
sais pas si on peut accélérer
innovation
un peu,
pole.
Romain.
Oui, alors, bon, effectivement, on a tout de même bien avancé
Yes,
sur ces
we've
projets
moved on
aériens,
very,
parce que
very
ça fait
well.
plus
In
de
fact,
3 ans
that's
maintenant
3 years
qu'on
we've
travaille
been working
dessus.
on this
On a une
program now.
bonne vision sur le
We've
potentiel de
got
reconversion
a fairly good
d'infrastructures. On a
forecast now
identifié
of
des
the
axes relativement
possibilities of
structurants
reconversion
de
now,
notre réseau
the
qui pourraient être
reconversion
reconvertis d'ici
possibilities of our
2030,
existing
2035
network
pour un usage
for
hydrogène.
hydrogen usage.
Donc voilà, donc c'est une des composantes des
So
projets
this
qu'on
is one
développe.
part of the
Le projet
project, and
ISO
in
s'appuie en
the
partie
HISO project that we were
sur des
presenting
canalisations
earlier on. So
existantes.
using the existing
Donc
pipeline
voilà, donc on a
network.
bien sûr un programme RI
Obviously, we've
qui continue
our
parce
research
que
and development is
les
ongoing
solutions,
in this question
aujourd'hui,
on this
on a besoin
question at the
de
moment. We
recherche
need
de
more research and
solutions techniques,
more technical studies
surtout pour
in
essayer
order to be
d'optimiser
able
au
to
maximum les
optimize the
coûts, mais
costs.
le gros du travail tout de même
Most of
a été
the
fait.
groundwork has
Voilà, on
already
commence à
been
être en
done,
capacité notamment de convertir les
and so
canalisations gaz.
that's why
Ça va
we
être
know where
facilité.
we're going.
Oui, peut-être pour répondre à la
Yes, to
prochaine
answer the next question, it's
effectivement,
true.
le
The
niveau de
level of
maturité
maturity
des
of
projets
your
peut
projects
varier,
may vary, in
surtout
fact,
sur ces nouvelles molécules et sur ces nouveaux
regarding
usages.
these new
C'est
usages, of
effectivement
course. So it's very,
très
very important
important
for us
de
to
monter
tell us
tous
all
vos
your
projets, quel
projects,
que soit leur niveau de
however
maturité,
mature they are,
parce qu'on va développer
because
des
we'll be
infrastructures
developing
qui
infrastructure
nécessitent un
which
certain
requires a
temps
certain
de
time
développement.
of development,
Et
and
l'objectif,
so
c'est de
the
pouvoir
objective is
couvrir
to
les
cover
besoins,
the
certes
needs,
à court terme,
certainly in the
horizon
short term,
2030, mais
2030,
également les
but
besoins
also
qui vont
the
arriver plus tard,
coming
2040,
needs in
2050.
2040,
Donc plus on
2050.
va pouvoir
So in
connaître
order to be
en
able to
amont
anticipate that
les
well
besoins en
upstream
volume,
in
en
terms of
localisation,
volumes and
ensuite il va venir la
localizations,
maturité bien sûr des
etc.,
projets, plus on pourra
and the
dimensionner les
sizing of this
infrastructures qui
project,
sont les plus adaptées
and to be able
aux
to
besoins de
offer
demain et aux
you,
besoins
the end users, the right sort of dimensions. That's why we need all this data now.
Alors, nous avons une question concernant
Question
le
concerning
coût
cost
de
of
transport,
transport.
donc, voilà, qui est évalué aujourd'hui
The evaluation
entre
is
10 euros
uh,
et 20 euros,
well,
10
10
centimes d'euros et 20
and to
centimes d'euros
20
par
centimes per
d'hydrogène
kilogram
transporté. Alors, on nous
transported.
demande plus de précision
Obviously,
concernant la
we'll be
solution.
fine-tuning that
Est-ce que
estimation,
je
but
te laisser répondre?
Alors en fait, ces
yes,
coûts-là
these
ont des coûts
costs
qui ont
have
été
already been
développés dans le
estimated
cadre de la
within the
vision
framework
de la
of
dorsale
the
européenne pour
hydrogen
l'hydrogène qu'on a
backbone project
mentionné
that we're
tout
talking
à
about
l'heure.
earlier on.
European Hydrogen Back. Donc le mode de transport, c'est du transport
So it's
par
pipeline
pipe,
transport,
et on
of course, and we
considère de
consider
l'H2
that
gazeux sous pression.
under
Donc c'est un
pressure.
petit peu
So
le pendant du transport gaz
this is the
aujourd'hui,
sort of the follow-on
ramené
from gas
effectivement. Donc ce coût
transport. In
inclut
fact,
à
so
la
the
fois,
cost,
si on se place dans la
if
vision
we're looking at
dorsale
the
de
hydrogen
l'hydrogène, à la
backbone,
fois la
we've got
notion
the
de
notion of
rétrofit, de
retrofitting,
reconversion des canalisations
reconverting
gaz
these
existantes,
pipelines,
mais
but it's
également le
also the
développement d'un
development of
certain
a
nombre de
certain number
kilomètres
of
dédiés
new
à l'hydrogène, qui seront des
kilometers
nouvelles canalisations.
dedicated to
Donc on espère
hydrogen.
avoir
These are
amené
new pipelines that have to
ces
be rolled
éléments.
out. Thanks,
Merci,
Letitia.
Donc nous avons une question concernant
A
la
question
régulation des
concerning
infrastructures d'hydrogène et
regulation.
CO2 ne sont aujourd'hui
So
pas régulées.
hydrogen and
Selon
CO2 are
quel
not
jour
yet
cela
regulated.
aura-t-il des impacts sur la feuille de route?
Will they be
Alors,
regulated soon?
à vrai dire, bon, effectivement, nos
Well,
projets jusqu'à
our
présent,
projects until
on
now,
les a
we've
développés
developed them
dans
under the
l'hypothèse
hypothesis
qu'ils devaient être
that they should be
intéressants,
interesting,
quelles que soient
worthwhile,
les modalités d'accompagnement de
whatever
l'État.
the
On va
assistance
chercher
from the
à avoir des
state. That's
projets
to
qui
say,
soient
projects
le plus
that are
optimisés
as
possible
optimized
pour
as
que le
possible,
coût
so that
rapporté
the
au
cost
kilogramme
per
d'H2 ou tonne de
kilogram
CO2 transporté soit
transported
le
is
plus
the
faible
lowest
possible.
possible. Now,
Aujourd'hui,
as things stand,
on
in
n'a
fact, we
pas de
don't have
visibilité sur ce que souhaiterait
visibility on
l'État
what
concernant
the French state
l'hydrogène.
would like regarding
On
hydrogen,
pressent tout de même que ces
but
grandes infrastructures seront
we
régulées,
think
mais
that
le
there will
cadre
be regulation,
reste
but the actual
à
framework,
fixer.
regulatory
En ce qui
framework,
concerne le
remains to
CO2,
be
il y a eu
fixed.
des
Regarding
annonces
CO2 now,
il y a
there
2
have
semaines
been 2
maintenant
weeks
dans le
ago.
cadre
2
de
weeks ago,
la
there
stratégie
was
nationale
a national
CCS, et il a été clairement indiqué
announcement,
qu'un cadre de soutien, un cadre
and
de
they
régulation
said, a national government
serait établi
announcement said
pour
that there
accélérer
will
le
be
développement des infrastructures
regulations for
CO2.
CO2.
Qu'est-ce que
What
ça
does that
change pour
change
nous?
for us?
Ça change, en fait, en tout cas, ça nous apporte
Well, it
plus de
gives us
confort en
more
tant qu'investisseurs,
comfort as
puisque
investors
la
because
régulation s'accompagne de
regulation
mécanismes de soutien à
means that
l'investissement
there
qui
will
permettent
be
de couvrir un certain nombre de
accompaniments
risques.
regarding
Par ailleurs,
investment
la
as well.
contrepartie, c'est que ça
And
impose une
also, it
transparence sur la
means
façon dont nous
transparency
fixons
in the
les
way
tarifs de
tariffs
transport
are
et de
set, and also
stockage. Et
storage
là, il y a
tariffs
un
are
vrai
set.
intérêt
And that's why
pour
it's
le
very
client
important
final.
for the end
Donc
user.
cette régulation,
So regulation then
elle ne peut être dans tous les cas que
can be
bénéfique. Elle ne change
I would say it's
rien.
beneficial. In
Si
fact,
ce n'est
it
qu'elle
does.
permet
But
en fait
it really,
d'accélérer
in fact, the end result,
les
it means
projets,
that the projects can be
puisque voilà,
accelerated
nous
in
sécurise
their
les
rollout.
clients
And
nous permettent
it
d'avancer
means that
ensemble
we
sereinement.
can move forward serenely.
Alors, je vais prendre la question suivante
The
qui est,
next
je suis
question.
producteur
I
d'hydrogène, en
produce
quoi cette AMI
hydrogen.
peut m'intéresser? Alors, en
What
fait,
value is this to me?
c'est typiquement
Well,
vos
it's
besoins
your
que nous avons
needs
besoin
that we would
d'adresser,
like to
justement.
know, precisely you, in
Nous, à
fact,
travers tous
through
ces
this project,
projets
in fact.
d'infrastructure H2, l'idée, c'est
The
qu'on puisse
idea
savoir
is
si
that,
vous avez besoin
if you
de
need to be able
transporter
to
cet
transport
hydrogène pour
hydrogen,
justement le véhiculer
to transport it
jusqu'à
to a
un
consumer,
consommateur, ou si vous avez
or
besoin
maybe you
de le
need to
stocker pour
store it
justement
in
offrir de la
order to be able to
sécurité ou de la
offer more
flexibilité
security or
dans la
flexibility
vente de
in
l'hydrogène
the
que vous allez faire à votre
in the
consommateur final.
commercialization of your
Donc,
hydrogen
on est
later down the
vraiment
line.
sur
So,
le recensement
that's
de ces
what the sort
besoins.
of needs that we're
Le but
looking at
étant,
the
comme le
moment.
disait
And
Antoine,
as
de à
Antoine was
terme
saying,
fournir
the idea being
un
to
service
offer
de
a
transport
transport
qui
service
soit le
which
plus
is as
compétitif
competitive as
possible par
possible
rapport à du
with
transport qui pourrait être routier ou
compared
sous
to
d'autres
other
formes.
forms of
Donc
transport and
oui,
storage.
cette AMI,
And
en fait, j'ai envie de dire, il
so
s'adresse
yes,
bien à
so
vous.
this project
C'est-à-dire
really
voilà,
concerns
de
you,
voir si en
spot on, in
agrégeant
fact,
plusieurs
because
acteurs sur
if
une
we
zone
can bring
géographique,
together all
ces
of the
infrastructures
stakeholders
de
within a
pipeline
geographical
deviennent
region,
une solution
then
prépondérante,
we can find a
majoritaire,
sort of
j'ai envie de dire compétitive
preponderant
pour
solution,
ce
if you
transport
like,
d'hydrogène
and
de vos lieux de
for
production vers les lieux de consommation.
certainly for a person like you, the way we transport hydrogen to your end
Autre
users.
question. Alors, les 600 km
The
en ce moment
600
début
kilometers,
concernent les
does
30%
that
des
concern
contenants gaziers
the
reconvertis à l'intégralité
30%
du
or
réseau
the
H2
entire,
prévu?
all of it?
On est sur
No, this is the whole
l'intégralité
lot,
du
in fact.
réseau
That's the whole
H2
lot of the
prévu.
H2
C'est bien les
network.
600 km, c'est à
600
peu près
kilometers
l'ensemble
is
de la
is
courbe
the
turquoise,
all of the
du segment
turquoise
turquoise
curve
que
that
vous
you
avez
saw
vu
on
sur la
that
carte graphique que
graph
l'on a présentée
earlier on.
durant le webinaire
But
et
you'll
que vous
see it,
trouvez
in
sur le
fact, you'll be
site
able to
internet.
download this presentation.
Le réseau H2 sera apte
Will
à
the
transporter de
H2
l'H2
network
100% ou bien limité à un usage méthane
transport
H2. Alors non,
H2
ici,
100%
on est
or with
typiquement
a
sur
mixture
des
of
installations
methane?
qui considèrent du
No, 100%.
100%.
This is 100%
Donc, on
hydrogen.
n'est pas
We're
sur
not
du cas
in a
blending.
blending.
On est
We're
vraiment
not doing
sur
blending here.
qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire en 100%
So
hydrogène
we're looking
demain.
at 100% hydrogen, certainly for the near future at least.
Oui, en fait, c'est ce que j'ai dit. Alors, j'ai une
A
question qui est
question in
en
English
anglais
here
sur la
concerning the
possibilité d'intégrer
possibility of
plusieurs
integrating
projets
several
sur
projects at
différents
different
sites de production ou de
production
consommation, peu importe.
or consumption sites.
Et est-ce que l'on
Do
prévoit
you
de faire
plan
une
to
corrélation
have a
entre
correlation
tout ce qui va être
between
production et
production and
demande? La réponse
demand?
est oui. Donc oui,
Yes. The answer is yes.
la
The
plateforme
platform
prévoit
will
de
allow
rentrer
you to
plusieurs
enter
projets.
several
Il faut
projects. So you
cliquer
just
sur le
click
petit,
on
la petite
the
proposition, le
on
petit
the
bouton
button
qui est
which
générer une
generates a
nouvelle
new
proposition ou quelque chose comme
proposal,
ça. Et
and then
ensuite,
you
vous
can
pouvez
then
faire
you
autant de
you can
formulaires que
send
vous
in as
avez
many
de projets,
forms as
soit
you
en
want, in fact,
production, soit en consommation.
and
Ensuite,
then
effectivement, ces
obviously
données
the
seront
data will be
agrégées, comme je l'ai
aggregated,
dit tout
as
à
I was
l'heure. Nous,
saying
on en
earlier on.
aura
we will therefore have a very fine-tuned photo of your needs, as fine-tuned sort of overview of all the dynamic around hydrogen, so that then we can resize in the most pertinent possible way. We can resize our infrastructure so that it really fits with your needs. In December, as I was saying, we will be presenting this aggregated data. We'll make sure that all the confidentiality of each and every one of your data will be conserved, of course, and protected. But it will be a restitution of all the data in aggregated form. That's December. The timeline now. It's a question concerning the timeline for storing hydrogen. Well, the timeline is required is to be the time required to construct every one of the bricks in the wall, storage and transport. At the moment, we're working with a number of partners in order to develop and be ready in 2030 to be able to begin to store this CO2. Obviously, we need to accelerate, and through the strategy that was recently announced, we can see that there's a will now, a political will to accelerate. The government really is showing political will, and also through our will also to work hand in hand with industrialists and with stakeholders to make sure that we can reach these targets that we've set and start to inject by 2030. And now, a question concerning delivery points for hydrogen and CO2. The need to have delivery points which are perhaps common to allow the clustering of hydrogen sites and production units. Yes, the answer is yes. The architecture of our network is such that it's coordinated in order to be able to deliver hydrogen and biogenic CO2 to all of the industrial sites throughout southwest France. But there could be various forms, of course, that this would take. Synthetic methane, for example, we talked about earlier. But it is our will to make sure that the architecture of our infrastructure has an accelerating effect in the rollout of this technology. Now, will the solutions be definitive? Are they set in stone, or will there be possibly other processes coming thereafter? Well, this first call for expressions of interest is obviously just a first step. Now, this is not committing any of the project leaders in any way, and if, according to the data that we aggregate after this webinar and after this call for expression of interest, we're moving to an open season process. That's to say, a process where the energy people in the energy sector know well, in order to be able to construct new transport and storage capacity in energy. And in the second phase, this open season process is committing. So during the first phase of the call for expression of interest, the idea is to go back over this project and to underline the key salient points of the project and to gather the territorial dynamics, which obviously might change in the second phase. But there's also the idea is to be able to then drive the global national policy, which can then bring in new, perhaps disruptive, but I mean the good sense of disruptive, new data or new disruptive elements, which could then provide new food for thought for the second phase. And so this call will enable us to specify what these design elements are required. But it's certainly not set in stone. The project is not set in stone at the outset, of course. A number of techniques, technical studies are ongoing, as I was saying earlier on, and to be able to design this project. So this will be just, a first step. This needs to be fine-tuned afterwards. But no, it won't be set in stone, and there is a subsequent phase.
La prochaine question concerne
Next question concerns financing. What about if you can't finance the project yourself? Can you help us?
Alors, la réponse est
The answer is no.
Alors, nous,
Our vocation is to develop large infrastructural projects by ourselves. We are the principal investors and financiers of that project, of those projects that we've developed. But the question, I think, concerns the infrastructure to join the pipeline to an industrial site. Perhaps I think that obviously we would like to work on this infrastructure in common, of course, and the discussions would need to be undertaken to discuss the financing of projects like that. But we know that a certain number of industrial sites don't necessarily have the will or the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, to be able to make this investment. But the tariffs for storage and delivery of hydrogen will be adapted, certainly, to those industries. Now, a question concerning the conversion potentiality of the existing gas pipeline. And how complex is it to retrofit? For hydrogen, in fact, as I was saying, in the high soil, there's 30% of reconversion. Antoine was mentioning that, and for several years now, and although there are still a number of technical challenges which remain, but Antoine was saying that we've undertaken all the technical studies here. We've sort of removed the risk, if you like, of all the technical issues here. We know what the feasibility is of this retrofitting, and well, there might be a need for a little bit more different equipment, but let's say we know how to do this. To meet a certain number of regulatory needs that will be no doubt laid down in the future. So, but the complexity of this is that we are dealing with a different gas. It's quite different from natural gas. So a number of very technical and operational issues require consolidating. But technically, we know it's possible. And regarding CO2, the technical infrastructure that we've imagined and have begun to design on the map that you saw here, it's 100% new infrastructure, and for two reasons. The first being that by 2030, we don't think we'll have sufficiently available or representative infrastructure used until now for natural gas that can be converted. In fact, that concerns the question of the timeline already, in fact. But also, of course, if you want to reuse and convert the existing pipelines, it would take more time. And that would mean we'd have to look at technically at the purity and the quality of the CO2 which is transported, and it might transporting in old pipelines might lead to some form of degradation. What's the Picasso storage capacity? Very significant nationally, between 500 to 600 million tons of storage capacity. And the west connection, will it not be enough? What about the eastern connection? well, each of the connections can be sufficient with regard to this 500, 600 million ton figure. Now, if we're talking about 2 to 3 million tons, obviously that's a different kettle of fish. And so obviously there is a will to offer territorial solutions first of all. So hence the need to develop new logistic routes through pipelines, and also the possibility of opening up new storage sites via terminals in areas that are perhaps a little farther removed from the areas that can be served at present. So this means a new pipeline. Obviously, that needs new pipeline to do that. A question concerning the cost of transport. Will it be similar? Will it be similar for all stakeholders and all players? And depending on the distance, well, our tariff structure that we have, the tariffs depend on the distance.
L'impact, voilà, de la distance.
Well, the impact of distance is relatively marginal, in fact. We can offer an attractive tariff structure. But we'll be undertaking discussions with the government to see whether the tariff structure needs to be fine-tuned. Another question concerning hydrogen. Will the hydrogen infrastructure be interconnected in Europe to be able to transport to Germany? So on the map that you saw earlier on, you can see that HYSO is a complementary project to the Barmar project, and in its structure, the Barmar project is linked to an eastern corridor, which is being developed at the same time, and precisely makes it possible to transport 2 million tons of hydrogen through the Barmar pipeline to the north of France into an interconnection point with Germany. Have you planned to mutualize the hydrogen compression capacities with other uses? Yes and no. Well, obviously, once we've got a compression capacity on a network, it means that we have a certain transit pressure, and of course, de facto, we will mutualize that throughout the whole network. In fact, and obviously, we have needs which are inherent to the storage, but we can use the means of compression which are available for transport. But clearly, the compression needs for compression, looking at this globally as things stand at the moment, they will be optimized to be able to meet the delivery needs and specific needs, and their implantation will be optimized to be able to meet those compression needs. And another question is, any questions that haven't cropped up in this webinar, will you be able to answer them subsequently? Yes.
Alors, une question sur CO2, comment s'interface le projet Picasso avec les projets de stockage de CO2?
Now, what about the interfacing between the Picasso and offshore storage projects? Well, in the national and European strategy at the moment, as Antoine was saying earlier on, the idea is to be able to store 50 million tons of CO2 by 2030. This is in Picasso. We'll be able to store and valorize between 3 to 6 million tons of carbon dioxide. That's far off the European needs, of course, the European needs. So So we'll need other storage points, of course, and we'll have a storage, a national storage policy to ensure our national sovereignty. But the storage, offshore storage, is very, very important. And the first projects which are being developed in France concern offshore projects, particularly in the Dunkirk region, through Le Havre and Saint-Nazaire as well. And the idea is to be able to store French CO2 in the North Sea.
Donc, si vous cherchez des alternatives au stockage CO2 en mer du Nord, qui sont des storages extrêmement coûtisés,
obviously, it will be good to develop alternatives to this North Sea storage capacity, and this will be a quest in the future.
Alors, je comprends qu'il y a encore
There
d'autres
are other questions, but unfortunately, we won't be able to. We're running out of time now.
Encore une fois,
But anyway, we will make sure that any questions that you've submitted on Menti, they will be answered. Anyway, we would like to thank you for your participation in this webinar, and you will have understood that this call for expression of interest is very important for us and you, and it's important that we can move forward together to accelerate your projects and the rollout of this infrastructure. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very happy day. Thank you.